The wind howled through the thick trees, shaking their skeletal branches like ancient fingers clawing at the darkening sky. Jenny gripped her lantern tighter, the dim light flickering in the oppressive gloom of the forest. She had taken a wrong turn. She was sure of that. The path she had been following had long since disappeared beneath a thick carpet of fallen leaves and twisted roots. The only sound beyond the wind was the distant creak of the woods. Then she saw it. Just ahead, a silhouette. At first, it seemed like a man hunched over, digging in the earth. But as she drew closer, the figure didn't move like any man. Its back was twisted at an unnatural angle, its limbs elongated, spindly, and covered in dark, matted fur. Jenny tried to call out, but the words froze in her throat. The creature's head jerked up suddenly, and what she saw made her blood run cold. Its face was a grotesque mockery of a human's, eyes too large and glowing faintly in the darkness, its mouth wide and toothy, grinning with malicious glee. Before she could scream, the thing skittered across the ground toward her on all fours, faster than anything she had ever seen. Jenny turned and ran, heart pounding in her chest. As she glanced back, she saw it dart behind a tree, watching, waiting, as though it was toying with her. And then, as suddenly as it appeared, it was gone, leave only the rustle of wind and the feeling that something far worse lurked in the shadows. Tonight, we talk about the Bogle. The Bogle is a creature of fear and shadow. Its appearance is fluid as the tales told about it. Descriptions vary, but certain characteristics remain consistent across all accounts. It is said to have been humanoid, have a humanoid shape, though twisted and grotesque. Its limbs are long, often described as unnaturally thin, with fingers that extend into gnarled claws. The Bogle's face is perhaps the most disturbing aspect. Sunken eyes seem too large for its head, glowing faintly in the dark, and a mouth that twists into a grin far too wide, revealing jagged teeth that seem ready to tear into flesh. It is always described as being covered in a dark, filthy coat of fur or rags, blending seamlessly with its surroundings. In some tales, its form is partially obscured by dense fog or shadow that clings to it like a second skin, making it difficult to see clearly. It lurks on the edges of the vision, appearing only when it chooses to, and then disappearing without a trace. Bogles are creatures of the old world, remnants of a time when the lines between the natural and supernatural were blurred. Born from chaos and fear, these spirits are believed to manifest in places where dark deeds have been done. Perhaps they are the souls of the wicked, cursed to wonder, or perhaps they are something older, primordial entities that feed on human fear itself. The Bogle is a shapeshifter, able to alter its form to better scare or confuse its victims. Sometimes it appears as a hunched figure. Other times it is looming, towering creature with arms long enough to drag along the ground. In all its forms, it delights in playing with its prey, instilling terror before finally striking. It prefers to haunt lonely forests, abandoned homes, and dark alleys, places where the air is thick with dread, and the line between reality and nightmare blurs. Legend has it that Bogles are born of human malice. They are drawn to locations steeped in tragedy or violence, places where the air hums with the energy of fear. In Scotland, where the myth originates, many believe that they were summoned by spirits of wronged souls, those who died unjustly or that were betrayed by those they trusted. The Bogle is their vengeance made flesh, wandering the earth to torment those who stumble upon their territory. And I keep wanting to call it the Bogle, but I'm pretty sure it's Bogles, but let's just go with that. There is also the belief that they were once protective spirits that have grown malevolent over time. They were guardians of the natural world, but humanity's neglect and destruction of the land turned them into vengeful creatures. Now they seek to punish anyone who invades their territory, turning forests and old buildings into traps for the unwary. Many have claimed to encounter the Bogle, and each tale adds a new layer of dread to its reputation. What follows are some of the most harrowing accounts from those who are unfortunate enough to cross its path. Ryan, a night watchman for an abandoned estate on the outskirts of town, recounted his unsettling brush with the creature. It was well past midnight, he began, his voice shaking as recalling the event still unnerved him. The fog that night wasn't like any normal mist. It was heavy, thick, like it had a mind of its own. I was doing my usual patrol around the estate, and everything was deathly quiet. No animals, no wind, just that eerie silence. That's when I heard it, scratching, faint at first, like claws raking over stone. Ryan paused, his breath catching. At first, I feared it was just a stray animal, maybe a raccoon or a fox. But then the noise grew louder, more insistent. It was coming from the walls of the old mansion, just outside the range of my flashlight. I turned the beam toward the cell, and that's when I saw it. A figure, standing in the fog, tall and thin. Its back bent as if it were too large for its own body. It was hunched over, one arm hanging impossibly long at its side, the other clawing at the stone. His voice dropped to a whisper. I could see its eyes, yellow, glowing through the mist, but it wasn't just looking at me. It was as if it was studying me, like a predator watches its prey. Its grin. Oh God, that grin was the worst of it. Too wide, like it was enjoying the fear. I froze. My legs, well, they wouldn't move. And then, it turned and disappeared in the fog as if it had never been there. I quit my job that night. I wasn't about to wait around for a second encounter. Then there was Catherine, a historian who had been researching an old battlefield known for its ghostly sightings. Her encounter, however, was something far more sinister. I had been visiting the site during the day, cataloging artifacts, trying to piece together a timeline of events, she explained, her voice calm but her eyes betraying the fear beneath the surface. But I decided to stay later than I should have. The sun was setting, and as the shadows grew longer, the air seemed to thicken. It was then that I realized the birds had stopped singing. There was no wind, no rustling of leaves, just this unnatural silence, like the land itself was holding its breath. She shuddered, pulling her jacket tighter around her. I heard something move behind me, a soft, almost shuffling sound, like feet dragging across the ground. I turned quickly, but there was just nothing. Only the tree swaying ever so slightly. But then, kind of out of the corner of my eye, I saw it. A dark shape moving between the trees, circling me. It was tall, gaunt, with a strange jerky motion, almost as if it wasn't used to walking on two legs. Every time I turned to face it, it would just slip out of my sight. Catherine's voice trembled now. I felt trapped. It never came too close, but I knew it was there, stalking me, waiting for me to make a wrong move. I finally caught a glimpse of its face, just for a second, but it was enough. Pale, hollow cheeks, those glowing eyes, and that hideous, twisted smile. I didn't waste another moment. I ran. I don't think I ever ran that fast as I did that night. When I reached the road, I didn't look back. I didn't have to. I could feel it was still watching me the whole time I ran. David, a retired mechanic who had grown up in a small village, had always dismissed the stories of the Bogle as mere folklore, until one fateful night. He'd been walking home from the pub late that evening. The sky was clear, but the road dark and quiet. I was a bit tipsy, sure, he said, with a nervous chuckle, but I knew what I saw. The path I usually took home cuts through a small patch of forest. It's usually peaceful, but that night, I don't know, something just kind of felt off. David's expression grew serious. As I walked through the trees, I heard footsteps behind me. At first, I thought it was just another traveler, but the steps were, I don't know, wrong. They didn't match my pace, and they sounded heavy, like someone dragging something along. I turned around, and there it was, this thing just standing just beyond the tree line. It was hunched low, like a man carrying a heavy burden on his back, but then it straightened up, and I swear, it was nearly 10 feet tall. He took a deep breath before continuing. Its eyes, that's what struck me first, burning like embers in the dark. It didn't move for a moment, it just stood there, watching me. And then it smiled, this awful, too wide grin that stretched across its face, as if it found the whole situation amusing. I'll tell you, I panicked. I started running, but it was right behind me. I could hear its breath, feel its presence closing in. When I finally made out of the woods and into the village, it was just gone, like it had never been there at all. But I'll never forget those eyes. Finally, there was the account of young Michael, a farmhand who lived on the outskirts of the village. His tale was perhaps the most chilling of them all. It was late, and I was out in the fields, finishing up some of the chores. The moon was full, lighting up the landscape pretty well, so I wasn't too worried about being out there alone. But as I was walking back toward the farmhouse, I saw something crouching near the barn. Michael's voice dropped to a near whisper. At first, I thought it was one of the neighbor's dogs, but as I got closer, I realized it was much too big for that. It was hunched over, its back twisted and bent at a strange angle, almost like it was broken. I couldn't see its face at first, just this long, black shape moving slowly and methodically. I called out to it, but for a moment, it froze. Then, in one jerky motion, it turned its head and looked at me. He shivered visibly. Its face, I'll never forget that face. It looked almost human, but not quite. The skin was stretched too tight over its bones, and its eyes were these bright, glowing orbs, like they were burning from within. It grinned at me, the sick, twisted grin that made my stomach turn. And then it stood up. It was taller than any man I'd ever seen, its limbs long and spindly. Started to walk toward me, slow at first, like it was toying with me. I didn't wait to see what it wanted. I ran as fast as I could back to the house. When I looked back, well, it was gone. These stories, chilling as they are, serve as reminders that the Bogle is not a creature to be dismissed lightly. Whether a malicious spirit or a manifestation of something far older, it thrives on fear, using the shadows to cloak its true nature until the moment it decides to strike. The Bogle is more than just a figure of folklore. It reminds us of the darkness that lurks in the forgotten places, the fear that comes when the veil between this world and the next is lifted. Whether it's a manifestation of guilt, vengeance, or the natural world striking back, one thing is certain, the Bogle is never far from those who wander too close to the unknown. So the next time you find yourself alone in the woods, or wandering through an abandoned building, remember the tales of the Bogle. You might not see it, but rest assured, it sees you. If you enjoyed tonight's tale, make sure to subscribe, leave us a review, and comment down below. And as always, stay curious but cautious, because you never know what legends, lore, or lies might just be waiting for you in the shadows.